back to the podcast. I'm hanging out with Ryan Pinder, sports fanatic, sports. What are you like? What would
sports
you just
nerd, sports honk, sports broadcaster. There's just a lot of homework to be done at night, so I have to watch a lot of sports.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
right.
so dedicated to the craft.
Actually,
My
speaking of homework and lack of homework on my behalf, last night the Jets actually beat the Bills, and I was stopped watching it.
Okay, game of the season already, in the sense that there might not have been a bigger storyline in the NFL season than Aaron Rodgers, this future Hall of Famer who's played for one franchise, this tiny little town the size of Red Deer in Wisconsin, the Green Bay Packers, finally going to the big city, New York, Hard Knocks, cameras behind the scenes. Hall of Famer goes to New York, great defense, great pieces on offense. Here they are, Super Bowl contenders, fourth play, boom, Achilles done.
Yeah,
Season
is that
over.
what it was?
Season's over. And so now they go back to Zach Wilson, this kid that they took high in round one a few years ago, who's been a bit of a flop. And I don't know that there's been more significant storyline built around a guy that got 4 snaps before his season ended. But it was an incredible game, huge comeback. And I think that's going to be a fun team to watch this year, because the young quarterback that struggled, he did a bit of that last night, but he pulled one out of the fire. They got to win.
Yeah. So is Rodgers done, do you think, or has he got some...
It's a good question. I think he's 40, so that means he's 41 in a year, if my math is right. Unless he's born on a leap year and he's actually like 160 or something.
Right.
So coming off an Achilles, like, he would really, really, really have to be willing to go to war, put in the work, because that's a tough recovery for a spry 25-year-old, never mind. Someone in their 40s who's made probably north of 200, 300 million. So not that it's about money, but it's just like, you can go live the next chapter. These guys are done their careers typically before they're 40. And it's like, I made a lot of money. I was famous, but I do want to have another career. So this is where he's probably got that pull of like, do I want to be a sports broadcaster? Do I want to get into acting? Do I want to be a businessman? Or do I want to go through hell rehabbing this for a year to hope it doesn't happen again, or to hope that I can get back to 100?
Yeah. I love it. Do I want to get into acting? I don't picture him being an actor, but hey.
I think he dated some movie star. That's why that came to mind.
Yeah,
but he is, he's a very intriguing figure, because he speaks publicly about a lot of stuff that isn't very mainstream. Like, he's talked about his ayahuasca things, which I don't really know a lot about. He talked about seeing a UFO and like vivid description of who he was with and what they saw on Hard Knocks, which is hilarious. So because of that, he's a polarizing cat. So I think he's like a big enough of a character. He'd go be himself in movies.
Yeah, that's
kind of like O.J. Simpson used to do.
Yeah.
Cam Neely's done a bunch. Seabass from Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
Or in Me, Myself, and Irene as well. So he could do that if he wanted. I just don't know, what does he want to do?
Yeah, totally.
He might want to join Joe Rogan's podcast.
Yeah. I listened to him on Joe Rogan. It's kind of like you said, he's polarizing, but then when you listen to him, he does make sense on a lot of things. So sometimes media blows things a little bit out of proportion, I would say.
It's too bad, because I think we moan about robotic answers, and like when players, they don't give you anything, and like, next game we'll work harder, one shift at a time, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And you're like, give us something, and then Aaron Rodgers gives you something, and you're like, this guy's crazy. It's like, well, come on.
Yeah, totally.
You can't have it both ways. You either want guys to like really tell you something interesting, or you don't.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh, he's seeking the spotlight. Like, is he? Or is he just being honest? And like, because his views aren't mainstream, they gather interest around them. Right.
Totally.
Like, I don't know that he's a attention whore, so to speak, but I think he has been portrayed that way by the media, which is a shame. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So Barn Burner podcast, Flames Nation. I want to know what both of those things are. And because when I first met you, you were at Fan 960.
Yeah. Sportsnet 960 in Calgary, Calgary's only sports talk radio station. Started there in 2013 and worked most of 9 years with Rhett Warrener and Dean Boomer Molberg. And the three of us have started a podcast that launched the opening day of the NHL season last year, October 11th. It's called Barn Burner.
Yeah.
And our partners on the podcast is FlamesNation. They have the savvy of knowing how to do these things that we don't know. Like, we're good at talking about sports and being idiots and talking about baloney and who's particularly hungover or stinky that day. What we're not good at is like, how do we put this on YouTube?
Right. Yeah.
So they had expertise. They were looking to gain a little more of a foothold in the Calgary market, and we needed someone that had expertise on the back end of the podcast. And luckily, for whatever reason, our silly show is got a bit of a following over, I guess, a decade plus for Dean and some other guys, but the three of us probably 8+ years.
Yeah.
So Barn Burner's the name of the podcast. We also have Afterburner, which is a post-game show that runs after all Flames games. We did school nights last year, and we'll do all 82 this year.
Nice.
And then, we're mixing in some live events and trips and exciting things that sports nerds should get excited about.
So how does it, what is sports talk radio or even talk radio as a concept? Is the evolution of that naturally podcast, or how did you guys evolve or just change up your format to become a podcast?
Well, I for one, like the three of us all had a lot of stuff going on in our life. The year we all at different times decided to part ways at 960. My wife went through a 6-month chemo battle that was a nightmare. And I was incredibly skeptical about the radio space as a traditional medium moving forward. You just sort of saw less and less resources around and less people around.
Right.
Like when I remember working at A Channel, same building that station eventually moved into in, I want to say the early 2000s. And it was like MTV Canada was on floor 2. Radio stations were there. The newsroom was buzzing. Arts and culture show in the evening. 6 a.m. news, noon news, 5 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, 11 news. Like it was just a hub of content creation. Totally. And it was like, wow, that was a special thing to go witness, because any room on any floor of this 4-story, 3-story building in downtown Calgary, there was just different stuff. And so you've got people talking about music and interviewing pop stars on one floor. And then you'd have a band playing over here. And then you'd have someone delivering the news here. And then a bunch of sports guys are over here watching a game that they're cutting up highlights for the sports portion of the newscast. And it was just like, wow, this is like such a nerve center. And for the last 3 or 4 years, when our station moved into that building, it was just empty. Right. And that's sort of what's happened to traditional media. If you looked at 2000 to now, like, what's the state of magazines? How are they doing?
Right.
Pretty much dead.
Yeah.
What's the state of local newspapers? Significantly much more bleak than it was then. What about local TV? Well, there's more and more syndicated content coming from elsewhere, less actual, real, hard newscasts considerably.
Yeah.
And in fact, people don't really turn to local TV for news. They're on social media for news. Right. I follow this account or that, or I might follow a news outlet, but I don't watch a newscast. Like, it's funny. My mother-in-law's in town from Australia, and I'm like a little bit jarred because every morning I get back from work or I'm on my way to work, whatever it is, and she's watching like American news, and I'm like, oh, people still watch the news on TV.
Oh yeah. my kids, they get stressed out staying with my dad because he has the news on all the time.
Yeah,
and
it's nuts.
In his world, that's just how he always
so
was.
So you stay on
right?
top of information.
Yeah. And they hate it. They're just like, can you shut the news off, please?
Because it
like,
doesn't stop.
Yeah, you got to learn. It's just like, I don't know if that's like, I don't know if having Fox News or CNN on all day is necessarily healthy.
No, neither would be like refreshing X or Twitter or Instagram
right?
all day. And
yeah.
It's just, yeah. And so, to long story short, all these traditional mediums, in my opinion, have just become digital media now.
Right.
And so why would I work for, a radio station where I see, in my opinion, less and less interest for ad revenue there amongst businesses in terms of a marketing tool, and less appetite from a listener perspective to go to the radio dial versus a podcast. Most of us have vehicles now where our phones immediately sync when we get in.
Right.
It's not like, oh my gosh, I'm in the car. What's on which station? It's like whatever I was streaming in my headphones working out, that I was listening to in the speakers in my kitchen when I was making breakfast, now is just on the moment my car is sunk with my phone.
Right.
And so that was a big component. And then, so the two things I've basically described is that you have an appetite for ad revenue to go to the digital space, and you have listener habits going to the digital space. Why am I staying over here?
Yeah.
Right? Like I try to, like, I guess it's one analogy. It's not necessarily a good one, but I'm like, would you really want to be a mail carrier or use email?
Yeah.
Like, did you like the carrier pigeon more and you were disappointed when they had trucks like delivering mail?
Yeah.
And now it's email. Like, it's just like, this is the evolution of content. You aren't a writer. You aren't a, TV person. You're not a radio person. You're not a reporter. You're creating media, and all of it's available digitally. And if it's not, you're way behind.
Yeah.
It should be pushed on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and it's on a YouTube site. And, I can download it to whichever of my favorites, podcasting app is, be that Amazon, Spotify, Apple, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not doing that, I just feel like you're being left behind. And there was some of that going on at the station, but it's a group of people that all, for the majority of their careers, have been working in traditional media. Are those the people that have the bright future ideas for non-traditional media? My bet was that it wasn't.
Right. Well, it's interesting, though, because you still, maybe not need is the right word, but you partnered with FlamesNation. And so there still seems to be a need for like almost that hub of some variety. So maybe talk about what is FlamesNation? How did that kind of come to be?
So I think the real origin of it is that there was an Edmonton version of it.
Okay, yeah.
And so I think as the story goes, Ryan Smith left Edmonton. He was finally traded. And, the Oilers have this incredibly rich hockey history, but everyone leaves crying at a podium. They never get to stay an Oiler for whatever reason. Gretzky did it, Messier did it, and even Ryan Smith, a guy with a mullet from not far by Edmonton. If he could leave and not finish his career there, it feels like no one will.
Yeah, totally.
There's a Connor McDavid question in there much later, I'm sure. But it just, someone started a website, like, bring Smith home, or don't trade Ryan Smith, or keep Ryan Smith, something along those lines. I should know more accurately, but I'm blanking on what it was actually called. And then it's like, oh shoot, we've got, for whatever reason, all these people visiting this website now. We've got all these email addresses. Like, what are we going to do? And so that was sort of when blogs were kind of a thing, where fans would have a say. It wasn't just the paper or the people that were traveling with the team that could have opinions they could publish about a team. I could watch the games and come to my own conclusions. It doesn't have to be this, gatekeeping. Here's media. Fans read this. You don't have a say. Blogs kind of open the door for people that were interested in a different angle of the sport to talk about it. And so this Oilers blog became very popular. Lots of people writing about the team, as things that talk about the Oilers do in Edmonton. It got a lot of traction.
Right.
And then it's like, well, shoot, there's got to be one of these in every city. Like, this is the way of the future, or at least it's maybe not the way of the future, but this is something that didn't exist that should exist everywhere and will exist everywhere moving forward. This notion that opinions on teams can only be held by these people with, access was sort of like, no, we can have that and these. And so that evolved into doing podcasts and shows and trips and partnerships and merchandise. And so the Calgary version of Oilers Nation is FlamesNation. Canucks Army is in Vancouver. There's other ones, but the Nations Network's a company that basically, I would call it like a digital media, like fan-facing media. That's a lot of double media. That's a horrible description. But I think I've described some of the things they do.
Well, what's interesting though is, so so as you see the evolution of, like talk radio for you guys specifically into podcasting, how does that change the dynamic? So say between you and your co-hosts, does it change the way that you interact with each other? Does it, like, for example, is the biggest change that you can now say fuck where before you couldn't say fuck? Or like, what is the biggest shift in the dynamic?
It might not necessarily be the dynamic between us, but being on camera was a big change for us. And it wouldn't be for other people. As I come in looking like a man collecting empties. What a place to be for collecting empties, by the way. Your fridges are all full here. And being emptied, I'm sure, regularly. Replenished and emptied.
We do our best.
As a man that looks like a bottle collector, what a find here.
Yeah.
But I just completely lost my train of thought.
No, just in terms of the dynamic of how you guys interact.
So the video thing was a little bit weird. It's like the first time you're ever on camera, you're like, it's like the whole Ricky Bobby, like, where to put my hands? Like, how am I acting normal when there's a huge light in my face and a camera there, not a human? That's not normal.
Yeah,
what about this is normal? How am I supposed to act normal?
Yeah.
And like, we'd done a little bit of stuff on camera, each of us sort of on our own and together, enough where it wasn't like shocking, but it just, to get comfortable in front of cameras was different. And I don't know. I think like my rapport with the audience is probably a little different. When you're a radio personality, people hear you and they know the things that you talk about. They understand what you care about. They know things about your family that you talk about, especially in the talk format, because you have so much time to fill. Like, I was on air 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
And there's commercial breaks, but that's a lot of me that people got.
Right.
But they never got to see me.
Yeah.
So you knew about me, but you didn't know what I looked like. And I feel like maybe people thought I was something, and then they see me and they're like, whoa, this isn't what I had in mind. Or
I
like,
always
that's
remember.
Boomer.
I
Because
always
everyone knew what
remember
Rhett
doing
looked
that.
like, right?
Totally. Well, back in the day, like growing up watching or listening to radio, like, anytime we were in the vehicle, my dad was listening to, I think back then it was 660 that played the Flames games and stuff like that.
66 CFR.
Yeah, so you would have this idea of what all these guys look like, and then to your point, you see them. It's like, what? That's not what that guy looks like. It was trippy.
Yeah.
So then, how has your relationship with the audience changed then with how everything is now? Because it seems to me like the only way that you could interact with them back in the day was they would have like. After the games, you'd have sports talk where people could call in. And if a guy was being an idiot, you could just hang up on him. And like that was his only connection point to reaching you guys. It seems to me now that there'd be that many more connection points. So how has your relationship with the audience changed then?
Well, shows changed to be a lot more video heavy and a lot less music because in the space we're in, copyrighted music's an issue. Whereas when we were in a cluster of radio stations, they had the rights to play music. So theoretically, any sort of copyrighted music was in our library. We could use it. And not to get too deep into the old show, but like Boomer, the main host on the show, the lead, worked in music radio forever. So he would, there'd be singing and he'd have a story about a song. And music always got us into something. It's early, it's cold, it's a long winter. We're up at 3 or 4 in the morning. He 3, me 4. Rhett comes in later to all be ready to go at 6. And music was just an easy way into a conversation because there'd all be an anecdote and that would be followed by something rabbit hole and then this tangent over here and we were off to the races.
Yeah.
And so we couldn't do that anymore. But what we could do is we could show you the clip rather than talk about it.
Right.
So rather than say, oh, here's the radio call of this, where again, theater of the mind, they can imagine the play happening. We can now show like this today, the little boing boing of his Achilles in slow motion vibrating in his calf, which isn't necessarily what I want to show people, but it explains how it's different. And we can react to videos. And what the internet is full of is people doing dumb things. And so that's sort of become like a little segment where something stupid, like, I don't know, someone trying to, here's an example. There's a forklift that didn't reach high enough. So they put a second forklift on the first forklift and the second forklift. And of course, everything falls over and it's chaos. It's like all this physical comedy. We have clips like that we can now watch with our audience. And yes, some people are listening just audio only on Spotify or Apple, wherever. But we had way more retention on the video side than we thought we would get after, of course, the show starts and people are like, they're back, let's see it. But we'll probably just listen. Well, a lot of people are still doing video and more than we thought. So that's changed. And in terms of our audience, like I feel like one of the challenges we have is we haven't really figured out the feedback loop yet. Where at the radio station we had this text line and people would just thumb text out all day long. And you knew when you had a hot item because it's radio, you're live. Yeah, no one's listening to it later. A very small number is relative to live. And if you had a hot button issue, it's like everyone's hammering in texts. I remember when that guy streaked the ice at the Saddle Dome. Like, oh my God, we never thought like about a streaker at a hockey game, and like millions of texts are coming in. Whereas now it's like a lot of people consume it afterwards. Yeah. So the relationship with the audience is that you're creating a show that's a little more evergreen, unless we're all hearing this at the same time. Right. And at the station they did the shows, but I feel like the bulk of the audience at the station was people listening live. Right here, right now, we are all in the same spot at the same time. And we're talking about news as it happens versus now it's like, this happened yesterday, depending when you are tuning in now. This is either new or you've heard about it for a couple of days. So the content shifts. But one of the things we have to figure out, I think, is how do we... And we've got ideas. And we will solve it. But it's like we need a little way for some more engagement. Because, yes, we have comments on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and other that we can pull from the stream and place into the show, that can be seen visually, that we can read. But we haven't quite got it to where we want it yet.
And in terms of like kind of your, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like artistic freedom, you're a little bit more just wide open to do whatever you want?
We never had a lot of constraints on us. Yeah. Like I would give our old boss, Kelly Kirsch, a ton of credit because it was like, we were kind of a show from an earlier era. Yeah. Like there would be days where it's like, it's Rhett's birthday. And we can literally hear people pouring whiskey on air. And they're talking about not being sober. And that probably is breaking a lot of rules, but God damn it, the audience loves it. It's a good show, and things get really funny really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's not to like endorse that behavior, but like he knew when to look the other way for the good of our show.
Right.
But for 99% of shows, that just wasn't a thing you would do.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of leeway. We were a successful show, and we had a certain open, honest, and like unapologetically like straight shooting vibe about the show. Like, I'm going to call this guy, a deadbeat today. Whereas other people are like, oh, maybe they should have done this. No, don't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
This guy's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what made us unique is there was authenticity about it. And so I don't feel like we've gone to a space where it's like, oh, the shackles are off.
Right.
But it's just another degree of that.
Yeah.
Where if I'm pissed off, I can say, fuck you.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, stop it.
Yeah.
And we're not a rights holder, which wasn't any sort of list of things we couldn't say so much as like, there's just in the back of your mind, you're like, well, we're in a relationship with the team whereas now it's like, you're absolutely free and loose. Like, not that we were pulling punches, but there isn't even a filter to think about.
Right. You mentioned, I was asking about what you enjoy, and you said, I'm trying to look at my notes here, it's friction versus authenticity.
So I think what you'd asked is like, what makes the show unique, or what makes the show successful, or something along those lines.
So friction / authenticity.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So the authenticity part I just talked about.
Yeah.
It's that this probably feels more like a conversation you'd have at a bar or in a locker room after hockey, where it's just people not being like, is the mic on? Here's my opinion on topic A.
Yeah.
And it's just like, no, come on, man. You didn't say that yesterday. What are you waffling on now?
Right.
Like, that's BS. 2 months ago, you said this. You can't go 180 on this. Or it's just a more real human interaction. That's the authenticity part. And the friction is that, like, we're three really different people. Like, Rhett came from a tiny little town in the prairies and made it to the NHL. The tiniest percentage of humans can relate to that life of being, a millionaire in your 20s. Yeah. To be a big strapping athlete that can, those guys, I don't want to say get away with murder, but it's just like, there's a world that they have access to that mere mortals don't. Right. They're like demigods.
Is that why he was the last one to come in the morning? You said that he was showed up closer to
steps. Yeah. And that's just, yes, it is and it isn't. A, that's the way Rhett's wired, but B, that's how this formula goes in sports talk. You have the hosts that do lots of research, and then the player comes in. It's like, what do you think? And they go, well, here's in my day what we did. Like, that's sort of the archetype for sports talk, right? Totally, yeah. So he wouldn't need to come in and prep. He's like, what am I prepping? Like, it's all in here. I played the game. Yeah. Right. And so, but the friction is that we're all three different cats. So we can't relate to Rhett's life. And then Boomer grows up in a small town and lives in the suburbs and, has been paying his dues in these tiny little markets, and finally gets to Calgary, the big city, where I grew up here, and I'm finally back after doing a play-by-play thing and love traveling the world. And I live right in the heart of the action downtown and grew up, just steps from the Beltline. And it's like, oh, come on, man. You don't know about this underground after hours bar? Like, what are you talking about, man? Like, get out of the suburbs, old man. And we're not that different in age, but because he's from a small town, like typically, like, you get married sooner, you have kids sooner. Right. And so he sort of, relative to me, would be like the grumpier old man. Yeah. Where I was like the hipster doofus, he would always call me or whatever. Like, oh, you're out having pints with your buddies. Yeah. And so those three different personalities created a show that there wasn't a lot of agreement. Yeah. And that sort of made for, I think in the first couple of years, some difficult, like heavy debating. Yeah. And like, I can kind of be like a pit bull in a debate. Like I just will lock and not release. And that's annoying. But as we sort of honed this through time, it was like, this show will always be interesting because none of these guys see the world the same way. Totally.
Over your career, I was trying to think about other changes in sports. So one is the amount of gambling that gambling used to be like fully illegal, like when it came to sports, and then it's kind of
taboo,
slowly made its way in. But it seems to me that nowadays it's just like, it's almost on some channels that's all they talk about.
Yeah.
How has kind of that, even just as a topic that you get to talk about or even have to talk about, how has that kind of changed the world that you guys kind of live in?
It has a bunch. It certainly has on a revenue side because, again, we talked about this traditional media space that's shrinking. Mm-hmm. One of the only segments that would be like up 1 billion% from 5 years ago is gambling because now it's legal.
Yeah.
You couldn't really be like, hey, come to my shady sportsbook, gray.com, and we promise we won't get busted and you won't get arrested.
Yeah.
Like there was no ability to market because it was this pseudo, I don't want to say illegal, like gray market's kind of, I think the best way to describe it. You're not selling heroin. You're doing something that society knows is happening,
right?
But it hasn't been made legal. And I guess, we haven't figured out a way to put it into the, okay, this is socially acceptable and legislated by a government body. And so revenue wise, it's big because there's all these sports books that, make money. Don't know if you've ever tried gambling. Hard to make money.
Yeah.
And that has obviously influenced content because what these big books want are people gambling.
Right.
Just like if you were selling beer, you'd want people drinking beer.
Yeah.
And so maybe before we would say, oh my gosh, the Flames are huge favorites in Chicago tonight. Like if they lost this game, it'd be a disaster. Whereas in the parlance of today's sports talk, you'd be like, the Flames are minus 350 tonight. That is a heavy favorite. And people are like, oh yeah, minus 350. And for people that don't gamble, that means to make $100, you would have to wager 350. Whereas if we're evenly matched in say an arm wrestle, it would be plus 100. So even money. If you win 100 would win you 100. If I win 100 would win me 100.
Right.
Whereas the Flames are minus 4. Like it's just the terminology around the way we discuss who's favored and the probability of outcomes is a little bit different. We would always have people predicting things. We would always have like long shots and underdogs and like ways of talking about what we think could happen or what would be likely or unlikely.
Right.
And gambling has just sort of changed the parlance of that. Like the sort of the lexicon's different, right?
Yeah.
Rather than say a huge underdog, you just they're minus or they're plus 600.
Right.
Yeah.
And then how does fantasy kind of play into that? Because you mentioned you're a big like fantasy player. Again, like, because a lot of times when I'm listening to football, I'll be like listening or watching, and I'm going, they've been talking about their fantasy team for the last 20 minutes. They're not even talking about like football.
I think it's horrible content and everyone enjoys fantasy.
Yeah.
But the problem with fantasy, it's like, well, I'll use the line from Chris Jones the other day. It's like, everyone's got opinions just like buttholes. They all stink. This is a guy holding up for a new contract in Kansas City. They got paid after their week 1 loss. It's like everyone's got a fantasy team. Everyone loves their own fantasy team. No one cares about someone else's fantasy league.
Right. Yes.
And so that's the challenge with the content around it.
Yes, that's fair.
Is that like, oh my gosh, wait till you wrap up my fantasy team. No one cares.
Yeah.
It's like, there's always sort of that like, roll your eyes. Oh my gosh. It's like listening to my dad talk about his golf game.
Right.
You're like, dude, you golf 100 times a year. And then you're like, on number 5, I get to the tee box. I'm like, oh my God, kill me. There's like 13 holes left after this. I can't do this.
Well,
I can't relive your whole round. I just played it with you. Like, I don't need.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's your unique experience. But he loves golf and he wants to tell you about his golf round. Okay. And that's like fantasy teams.
Yes.
I don't want to hear about your fucking golf round.
It's like, because your kids play hockey, right?
Yeah.
And you coach.
Yeah.
So my two older brothers, they both love coaching, which I've never, for whatever reason, I've never been like the kind of guy that likes to coach. I like to drop my kids off. I like to watch them. But so my brother, if I was to ever accidentally ask him how his kid did in hockey, it would be, the explanation would be, I could have just went to the game and it would have taken him longer to fucking just, it takes him longer to describe. So, that's fantasy is the same idea.
Yeah.
Just like,
and it's harder to monetize. Like if it was the gambling space, you're like, okay, it might not be great content, but we're getting paid. So we grit our teeth and we do it.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the case with gambling stuff, but it can feel like that in some spots. It can be tedious. Like, the Women's World Cup, New Zealand is plus 800. Like, I'm sorry, I can't feign interest in that.
Yeah.
In the gambling odds for an event that, comes every 4 years.
Yeah, 100%.
But fantasy, there's just not there's no financial real windfall. Like you go play fantasy football, you're not paying a nickel to Yahoo or ESPN or CBS or Sleeper. Like they're not making billions a year. They're not building castles in Las Vegas with fantasy money. It's gambling money.
Yeah. So, okay, one more. I want to ask you about fans again, because I'm always interested. One of the things that you said is that over COVID, you guys had, like, in terms of the community that you guys created, that people were leaning on you. I feel like, for some reason, radio, but especially like with you guys, because you were so like interactive with your fans and stuff, there's like this special bond that you create. So what was it about, that time in your career? What was it that, where you felt like you almost have like a different responsibility to people? Like they were like listening to you, they were leaning on you. What did that mean to you?
Well, I don't think we knew it at the time, but when COVID happened, I was working afternoons with Pat at 960. I'd gone off mornings. Rob Kerr had gone to work for CSEC, the Flames, and doing stuff with the Hitmen and the Flames. And that opened up a spot on afternoons. And I was this sort of third wheel in the mornings. It was Rhett, Boomer, and then another guy. And I was that other guy. And probably more than like a third wheel in terms of like how it played out and how much I talk. But I was like, okay, this is great. I could go to afternoons and, there might be more money, bigger profile, get my name on a show. Like this is sort of like trying to go up the ladder of career stuff. This would be a good career move for me, as much as I might go from a show that I might love and think's a better quality show more. I'll be like, it's time to like put my fingerprints on this show,
right?
And like have more of my input on how things are going to go rather than following other people's leads. And then the pandemic hits, and it's like the boss calls. He's like, I need you back on mornings. Like you and Boomer had an ability to like talk about nothing forever, and there's no sports. And so I need that back. And our ability to bullshit and bleep around without sports and still create engaging content was what he really needed.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, I just stopped waking up at 4 a.m, 250 times a year ago. Like, I don't want to go back to that. I've just moved on. And now my kids' preschool, I've got them in the mornings or afternoons. Like I've set up my life to not have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's what the station needed. And, I always liked what we created on that show, as much as it might have been frustrating a lot of the time. Just because of all the friction. It was like an exhausting show mentally at times. Because you'd always have to be, sticking up for what you believe or fighting back against people.
Well, it's funny too, because it's even like
you.
just like hanging out with guys sometimes can be, tiring, because if you say something stupid or you're not really paying attention to what you're saying, you have two guys just like attacking you like instantly.
Which is why people like the show. It's real, right? It's not this polite, we'll agree to disagree. Next topic. Like that's not the show.
Totally.
So I went back to mornings and we started doing really stupid stuff. And they'd started before I got back. They were doing like potato chip brackets and chocolate bar brackets. And like we would put on the NFL Films music, this like majestic orchestral, like very dum 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 dum, and be like, and the 15 seed Swedish berries are up against sour soothers, and you're like, this is what we did, for weeks and months on end. And I remember it was like the Bundesliga came back, German soccer was the first pro league back, and it was like, oh my god, sports, yes, like finally, and then you're like 20 minutes in, you're like, this is horrible. I've never watched Bundesliga before. I'm sure soccer fan. I can't do this. And you're like, we need sports back.
That's hilarious.
And it was just this empty, endless walk through the desert without a glass of water for sports fans. It was like shut down. Like, news was still happening. Politics was still happening.
Right.
And like robust times in those, because, governments and societies are trying to figure out how to deal with the pandemic. Sports was dead.
Yeah.
And so we would hear years down the road, which is now, I guess, that like people's lives were very different. We knew that like, okay, I don't work with people anymore. We can't do interaction within 6 meters.
Right.
It's a pandemic. Like, I'm now working remotely from home, or I just don't get these interactions in, a hockey locker room because there's men's rec league got canceled. All these personal interactions were gone, but one that remained was this bond with these idiots you'd listen to every morning. And so even though life was really different, there was your interaction with these people that you feel like you know because you listen to them for a couple hours or 20 minutes or the whole show, depending on your level of, but that meant a lot to people who's may have been really, really isolated.
Yeah.
And it was like, when it wasn't the pandemic, you'd hear this sort of stuff from people like, oh, I was in the hospital, or, you know, something where I was isolated, where I didn't have access, but you guys gave me that human need to be social and to communicate with others. Yeah. Even though you're only listening, you don't have that feedback to be able to say, hey, I want to jump into this conversation.
Totally.
But during the pandemic, that was especially, I don't want to say surprising, but it was very, very important to people. And it was kind of neat. And I always thought at the beginning, it's like, what was it? It was called like certain people had a different tier of what they were allowed to do. And it was like, there's frontline workers, and then there was like these other people of society that you needed to be able to work to supply some sort of necessary something or other.
Right,
so truck drivers, but like radio, we were.
Yeah.
So people were told to be home, but like, oh no, if you work at a radio station, you get to go to work because it's a necessary thing. And you're like, that's ridiculous. We're literally coming in talking about baloney and like some dude's fart from a week ago that we could still smell in the room. Like, this isn't some necessary, like, crucial staple of the economy nonsense. But on the back end, years later, it was kind of like, I guess it kind of was in a weird way. Even though we weren't doing the news, we, you know, not trying to do any of this or to be like, look how great we were, but it was just like, that was an outlet people really needed to just hear normal human conversation. And maybe it's a bit of escape from the chaos that the pandemic was, but also just that, we're social animals. Yeah. We aren't like wolves. Well, I guess wolves are wrong. We aren't like a lion or give me a goddamn animal that lives on its own. Like wolves hunt in packs, awful example. Lions have prides. There's one dude and a bunch of chicks. Sounds fun. But like, there's got to be some animals where it's like, off you go on your own and you're at peace with that. And that's how you roll.
Platypus.
Humans, sure. Yeah. Humans are social animals. Yeah. And when you're told to sit still and not interact with other people, we sort of
when I think because you said, you guys, like, because I would listen a lot and you guys had like really, I mean, you guys would have like, oh, I had wings last night, and so they would get descriptive of what's then happening with your body as a result of having too many hot wings the night before. You know what I mean? Like,
very base.
Yeah.
Not like, intellectual,
but hilarious, right? So one of the things that struck me is you said that what you love about what you do is that it never felt like work in a way, right? Because it's something you, as a kid, wanted to be a broadcaster, a sports broadcaster, right?
I mean, we all probably wanted to play sports, but I think anyone that's, you know, coherent to their surroundings figures out really early that you're not in the cards. You have to be so bleeping good. Like, I feel like I have to explain this to some hockey parents. Like, do you understand, like, how many people out of 10,000 can get to that level? Like, stop talking about this like this. You're training NHL. This is kid hockey.
What you want your kid to be. Your kid's not going to play in the NHL, so give it up.
Yeah.
But the thing about what you do that's unique is, like, I enjoy sports, but like, you have obviously a passion for it, right? To be able to sit down and talk about it every day and break it down and dissect it, and like you said, look at everything. That's a unique thing, you know, like, and I don't have that. I have like I said, I was watching the Jets game and I kind of blanked out halfway through and started watching American Ninja Warrior and went to bed, right? So you've had this passion, and then you say it doesn't feel like work. But then I look at like, okay, all the towns that you've worked in, you know what I mean? And it seems like, you know, to get to where you were, it was actually a lot of work when you look back at it.
Yeah, it was a long road, but I mean, I don't know that there's anything else that I would go make the wages I made for a decade to try to get where I am. And because it just would have like, well, this is, if it's not what I absolutely love, like, there's no way I'm doing it for that number. Right. Well, and think
about that.
I'm 25 or 26. What would I have been? It's 2006, 7, 8, I was in Penticton. So the summer of 2006, I take a job at Fort St. John, BC. So I moved from downtown Toronto. I'm 2 blocks from a subway stop, Bathurst and Bloor. Yeah. You've got, you know, Jamaican food. You've got, you know, African food, European food. Like, I think I counted like 25 countries with a restaurant within 5-10 blocks of me. Yeah. So like, you're in one of the most multicultural places on earth. Yeah. Like, you get into Toronto, there's people from everywhere. There's 10,000 people from everywhere in Toronto. Like, you go watch a World Cup or a Euro or Olympics there, it's phenomenal. You're like, who's playing today? You're like, oh, Brazil and South Korea. You want to watch with the Brazilians, you go Dundas West. You want to watch with the Koreans, it's like up on Bloor, just west of Bathurst.
Right.
It's like to go, like, what? That's like traveling the world
Yeah.
in your backyard. And so I'm living there, and you're out, and you're not like seeing a bunch of dudes that were born in Red Deer and Saskatchewan and Calgary. It's like, oh, she was born in Taipei. This guy here is from Manaus, Brazil, the capital. Like this guy over here speaks 5 languages and moved here 4 years ago from Ukraine. Like, it just felt like the world was there. And I'm going to radio college, just sort of trying to round off the edges of a lot of radio experience I had, but not a formal training after university. I get this job before I finish my 1-year radio crash course. And I moved to Fort St. John, where it's like dirt roads and huge trucks with machines on the back, and people are dropping out of high school to work on the oil patch. And everyone is from Fort St. John or a smaller town around there, or just there to work oil and gas. And I'm like, this is the exact opposite place on earth from downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
I know the globe is a sphere and this isn't the other side, but there's nothing more different than this from where I was weeks ago. So that, but again, I was a sports broadcaster. I called play-by-play for a junior B team, a senior AAA team, whichever team was on the road I'd travel with. And I introduced music on an afternoon radio show. And I was the sports director of the station. So I would prepare a sportscast for noon and another one for 5. And I saw this job description. It's like hockey play-by-play, sports director, and afternoon show host. I'm like, I don't care where this is. Like, this is my job. This is what I have to do to get where I want to go.
Right.
And like, they could offer me 0. I probably would have found a way to make it work. But I think I ended up making $26,000 for that year.
Yeah.
And I was thrilled to do it.
Totally.
And you're seeing these kids dropping out of high school making 80, 100 grand. And it's like, oh man, like, people don't get what I am.
Well,
I don't really get what these guys are.
There's got to be a passion there, right?
Yeah.
And a vision. But the irony then, I guess, too, is if someone would have described to you then what you do now, you wouldn't have even understood half of the words they were using because it didn't exist.
No, but I think I'd be pumped to hear that it was kind of what I wanted. Like,
yeah.
Like, to talk about sports is just something I love, and to have opinions on sports. I don't have to go to the lab and be like, oof, let's come up with something here. Like, how do I feel about this? Like, I'm just full of them. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No,
and that gets exhausting sometimes, but I'm always going to have an opinion on something about sports, and I love watching sports. And like, I feel like in my life, a lot of these great moments or interactions I have with people are surrounded in this, cloak of sports, whether I'm at a sporting event or talking about an event, or I love this in Toronto, you meet someone and they're like, oh, I'm from here. And be like, oh my gosh, tell me about, were you there for Euro? Or like, I loved what your Olympic team did here. Like, it's such an easy entry point to a conversation with someone. If I know where you're from and you like sports, we can just immediately take down a wall and have a bond of sorts, or just get past that. Like, hey, how about the weather?
Yeah.
Right?
So if you find out someone doesn't like sports, then it's you just kind of slowly back up. And
I've found it's harder as I've gotten older because I used to like really be up on. I shouldn't say be up on, but like I did film studies at university. Right. I always like going to like the Uptown or the Globe or the Plaza and just seeing like independent film and stuff. So you could talk to people about film.
Yeah.
And if you're reading a lot of books, you could have that discussion. And I'm just a social whore. I love meeting people. I love talking to people. But all of my efforts, like 90% of my efforts, are focused on this one sphere. So to talk to someone that doesn't like sports is more challenging than it used to be. But it's not obviously impossible. I mean, I love to have fun. I like traveling. I love meeting people. But I just feel like if someone's a sports fan, I can immediately get so much closer to that person in moments. Like if you're Italian, we can talk about Euro. And it's like, you will tell me where you partied, where you were, how amazing that was. And like whatever it is, right? Yeah. And that, if you're Swedish, I can be like, oh my gosh, these hockey players, let's talk about this. Like, oh yeah. Like if I can talk to you with never knowing you within a minute about your heroes and some of the greatest moments in your life, doesn't it feel like we know each other?
Yeah, totally. Who is your hero then? Hockey hero or sports hero? I shouldn't say hockey hero.
I don't know. I mean, my brain doesn't really work like this. Like I'm really bad at like lists.
Like, do you have a favorite?
What's your top 5 this or your top 5 that? I'm like,
well, even like mentors and stuff. Do you have people that you looked up to in the industry? Like listening to, you grew up in Calgary, right? Mm-hmm. So Do you have the memories of, listening to play-by-play? Do you have someone that you kind of looked up to in that
Yeah,
respect?
Peter Marr was he was like the gold standard of play-by-play. And he did the radio here for the Flames from day one right until about 2013, 14, or 12, 13. Somewhere in there. I think his last year might have been 12, 13. And Pete was just phenomenal at painting a picture.
Yeah.
And very quick cadence, but so much detail. He could tell you so much. And that's the challenge of play-by-play. You have 12 people on the ice plus officials. It's an incredibly fast game. People are bumping into each other. To, in your brain, say, this is what's important, this isn't. Describe it as efficiently as possible because something else has already happened.
Yes.
Like, this isn't baseball.
Yeah.
You don't have 15 seconds now between pitches. Used to be longer. To be like, outside ball one. And I remember in 84 at the All-Star game when Bobby Bonilla, there's a strike 1-1.
Yeah.
Now Bonilla and his second baseman, like it's these two conversations. It's like, here's the game and here's storytelling. And it's such a slow moving pace that, there'll be some double plays where you've got to tell people what's happening, but it's a really slow, long, lots of time, be descriptive. And hockey is just chaos. Be as efficient as possible because there's so much to tell people.
Absolutely.
And if you use too many words, that's one less thing you can tell something about the game later.
It makes me think of, and God bless Ed Whalen because I think he was an icon. But I remember, I feel like in like the early 90s or whatever it was when the Russians started coming over. And by the time he was done pronouncing the one guy's name, like it was already in the other end for 30 seconds. It was like, totally. I just felt so bad for him.
Sergei Makarov.
Yeah.
And like, Ed. I grew up on Ed.
But Ed was okay, if you think of the movie,
he was a showman,
Anchorman,
right?
Oh, dude, like
because he did Stampede Wrestling and Flames,
and he did like the news, like he did. He was like the weatherman.
2 and
He
7.
had his own radio show.
Yeah,
he had a column in the
Sun. He was
Sun.
a personality and a showman.
Yeah.
Where traditionally that position is the straight man that just gives you the facts. Like someone that describes wrestling is very different than someone that's just bringing you facts.
Totally.
Right? One is over the top and
like
it's a
he
production.
would get on the weekend, he's getting slammed into the turnbuckle by the Cuban assassin. And then on Monday, he's like, he's doing the play-by-play for the Flames. Yeah. It's insane. Like a human being like that will never exist again.
It would be tough to do.
Yeah, like if you look at the Anchorman, the movie.
Yeah, that
doesn't
close.
even do justice. Like Ed Whalen was better than that.
Yeah, he was the real Ron
yeah,
Burgundy for sure.
I love it.
And like I don't want to speak out of school, but like a huge toupee, like part of that whole.
I think he had a commercial on Stampede Wrestling where he showed that he wore a toupee.
I don't think I'm speaking out of school. I don't.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
A ring-a-ding-dong dandy,
man, just classic.
Malfunction at the junction.
Yeah.
Like you had all these catchphrases right from Stampede Wrestling.
Like you could do that, and then you could be like, I don't know if he was an anchor man for 2 and 7, but he was certainly like the weatherman or whatever.
Sports for sure.
Yeah, probably, and then so you had this like authenticity, but then this silliness, and he was a showman for sure. So you mentioned when you lived in Toronto, how much you loved the culture and stuff. You also mentioned that you've traveled a lot, so you've been to 29 countries.
Soon, yeah. Leave tomorrow.
Is it? Yeah. Is it? That will be 29.
I fly to Denmark tomorrow. I used to travel a ton. I love travel.
Damn
Family
kids,
makes
right?
it harder, and making media money made it harder for a while. But being a social whore, you have friends everywhere, and you can sort of lean on that a bit. And I feel like, there was some in our lives. We've lived in probably the best window ever for global travel.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it's getting bigger. I feel like it's the opposite.
Yeah, big time.
And so,
do you have favorite, like you said, mentioning that you love different cultures and stuff like that? Are there specific countries or specific trips that stand out as like go-to places that you'd love to go back to?
They all do, and my memory's so shoddy. It's like if I mention, you lead me down a path and I'll stumble upon like something that I think is amazing. I'm like, wow, I didn't even think of that. But like, for example, like on my stag, we went to Tokyo, and I'd never been to Japan before, but like Tokyo is maybe civilization's greatest feat. There's no place on this planet where more people live. It's the most densely populated place on Earth. And there's no crime, and everyone's incredibly polite. Everything's on time. And it's like clean. How?
Yeah.
How? Like that's just a complete mind fuck when you go to most places in most countries on earth. You'd be like, no, like 40 million people can't live in the same place.
Yeah, it's not.
And like New York's amazing and it's not nearly that many people. And it's like chaos and there's rats and there's violence and there's crime and it's not perfect and it's amazing still. But it's like, you're like, oh, it's a big city. You kind of have to put up with some of the bad stuff.
Right.
And then you go to Tokyo, you're like, there's none of the bad stuff.
Yeah.
There's no homelessness. Everyone has a job. It's clean. People are incredibly polite. You know, everyone takes incredible pride in what they do, whether that's washing a toilet, delivering the news, being a stockbroker, driving a taxi, cooking ramen, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you might be the best reggae DJ that's on from midnight till 6 a.m. in all of Tokyo, but that's you.
Yeah.
And there's this pride and ownership that everyone in that society has, that like Tokyo's a marvel. And that just doesn't mean that's my favorite place to go. It's not. I've been once and it was amazing. But when I talk about like loving different cultures, it's like, that's a completely different way to live your life. If you or I were born in Tokyo, our lives would be completely different. Right. If we were born in Winnipeg, they'd be pretty similar. Yeah. Right. And so it's like that, the way that society operates is so different. And that's just a trip, man.
Well, because you take for granted as you grow up that that society can't be different, that this is just the way things are. So to see something that's a complete 180, it's just like, oh, we could throw out everything that we assume is the only way it's done, and society still exists. I fly tomorrow, land Thursday at 11:15 in the morning, and I'm like, how am I going to get from the airport in Copenhagen to my hotel where I'm meeting a pal? My best buddy lives in Sweden now. He works on video games there. And so I'm like, geez, like I better go Google this. And it's like, oh, just get on the M2 line and get off at this stop. It's 22 minutes and it's a 300-meter walk from there. I'm like, oh yeah, Europe does transit. Yeah. You don't want to own a car in these big cities. You're right. Like, why would you? Yeah. It would be like owning a car in New York. Like, what a pain in the ass. Yeah. And you forget that, oh yeah, like I'm in North America. We have not built society that way. No. And not to point fingers at why or right or wrong, but it's just a totally different way of living life where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go get a Metro card for 3 days and I just hop on the M2 line, I get off at the stop and I'm there and it's 20 minutes. And I look, if I'm driving, it's 30. Oh, it's more efficient than having vehicles. You have amazing. You have no choice, essentially. Like, we don't even have a train that goes to the airport. But hey, that's another. And again, not to say better or worse, but just to go experience that different way of living. That's the trip. Yeah, no, 100%. Not to be like, we have to live like they do here or we have to live like this society is. No, not at all. But enjoy exploring those ones, right? Yeah. Don't go operate like a North American in these countries. Go do what they do. Yeah. Right? Like if don't go looking for the Pizza Hut. No, like if you're in Barcelona, have a siesta in the afternoon. Yeah. Then go out and you wait till 5 a.m. when the transit starts up again to come home from the bar. You don't go until midnight or 1. Yeah. Don't go out at 9 and moan about it not being busy. Like, do what the locals do. Do what the locals Experience the different culture. You nap for 3 hours in the afternoon. No wonder you can stay up till 5 a.m. and when the tube opens up, you can zip home. Yeah. So have you found that, with the new way that you guys are doing, you have the podcast, does it match up with the way you want to live your life a little bit better? Like, are you able to do these trips and stuff like that a little bit easier than doing kind of the more of a corporate gig? Yeah, I don't even know if that it's a corporate angle or not. Like, I just think that the show's a successful show. Where can we put the show, do the show? Who do we partner with the show to make it the most successful it can be? And what does that mean? Well, we want it to have people listening. We want it to generate revenue. We want to live good lives. I want to be able to coach my kids hockey. I want to be able to stay up till midnight and it not be, oh, well, now I got to go to work on 4 hours sleep. Yeah, that's the insane part. Right? And it's a combination of all these things. So it's early and it was year 1 of a startup. So was it, the most money I've ever made in my life in 1 year? Absolutely not. Yeah. Could it be? I hope so. Yeah. Could it be as soon as this year? I hope so. So these are things that we will find out. And I mean, there's lots of great momentum. We've gotten a lot of different spaces on it in terms of listenership, in terms of like the social media stuff, in terms of revenue. And so I would have zero regrets about the switch that I've made. I'm also sort of wired to look for positive things. And I think that's an amazing way to travel around in your one lap on Earth. Yeah. If you're only looking for things that could go wrong, you're just paralyzed. Yeah. You won't do anything. Yeah. And so I'm incredibly optimistic and excited about what the future holds for us. And, media people don't make a ton of dough. Yeah. Some do, but very few
and it's a lot of people scrapping and a few that get good paydays. If we can be the people that do what we love and have the resources to live the lives we want to live and to be able to like pick our vacation and to do the content that we want to do and to partner with people that we want to partner with and do everything on our terms, like how's that not a win?
Yeah, 100%.
How's that not all wins? Like we're the 72 Dolphins here. We're just stacking W's.
The 72 Dolphins. I don't know what that means. No,
some might not. Yeah,
awesome, man.
Only undefeated football team ever in the NFL.
Yeah.
Full circle, the NFL.
Exactly. Hey. Well, my favorite team has always been the Patriots, and I was a Tom Brady.
Important because if you're not,
yes,
you're a front runner. You're a bandwagon fan.
Yeah.
You know, you are the scourge of the sporting universe.
No,
is that the right word?
When I was in university, we flipped a coin because we all watched the NFL, but none of us had a team. So
we like this. We need a team.
We have to have a team.
Yeah.
And so my cousin laughed because he said, "You may as well be a Jacksonville Jaguar fan. Like the Patriots are terrible."
Like
so
a bad expansion team at the time, the Jaguars.
Yeah, and then he was a Bills fan, so it's been a fun 20 years for sure. Hey man, I just want to say thanks for taking the time. This is awesome to get to know you a little bit better. When you were on the radio, I did listen to a lot. I was able to be on there a couple times to talk about some ABF stuff. So you guys were always, really good to us. And so to see you kind of evolve and succeed in the way you're doing, it's pretty awesome.
Thank you. And likewise, I mean, it's neat to see what the operation you guys got and the relationships and the amount of trust and respect that people have talking about you. I mean, it's an industry that isn't huge, but everyone loves the work you're doing and the events that you put on. And if I ever need it's the whole, was it the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon?
Yeah.
It's just your phone. If I ever need anything done in the distilling beer space, I'm just like, oh, Mark, I'll know that guy.
Yeah. Mark, yeah.
We're like, does this person exist? We're like, oh yeah, over here. That's the person.
I do it again. It's one of those things. It's like, you wake up one day and it's like, how has it been? Like, it's been 20 years since I still feel young. And then sometimes I think I'm like, oh shit, I'm like, I'm 45, I'm 46. However,
I am thinking about that a lot as I plan this trip. I'm like, the last time I was in Europe, I was like 25 or 24. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I got to find this cool club or like, where am I doing this or that? And I'm like, I'm 41. Am I like crazy old guy now doing this? Because I'm still me.
Yeah,
I don't feel like I'm 41.
I feel like, in terms of like waking up every morning, like I'm up, I'm like pumped for the day. I'm like, let's go. And I'm like, it's weird. But, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're truly doing what you love to do and that's all you can hope for. And so for you, obviously I see it. It's just like, you're still just jacked and that's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sleeping more than 4 hours in a row, hot stuff.
Fuck. Yeah.
I heard sex is cool, but have you ever slept for more than 4 hours in a row?
Sleep is better. Sleep is better. Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Right on, man.